You're listening to an Ono Media podcast.
Good morning, and thanks for joining me for Rise in Crime, your morning caffeine hit all about crime. I'm Mama Jules, and we're going to start today with a case that's just horrific. I don't even know if I can come up with a word that's better than horrific, but I think we can all learn something about the legal system and also about just being better people. I try very hard to remember the victims here at Rise in Crime, but I want these victims in this specific story to just move on with life. I want them to have anonymity, and if they choose to share their names and stories, then it's on their terms. Now, this is a human trafficking and civil rights case, but after I tell you about Jeannie Whitefeather and Donald Lance, you might be surprised that's what the couple were found guilty of. But I promise you, it's the system using the most egregious charge to get the most profitable net of years behind bars for these two adoptive parents who some have labeled as racists and monsters. Now 62-year-old Jeannie and 63-year-old Donald, they're a white couple that adopted their 5 children, now ages 8 to 18 years old, from a shelter for homeless and vulnerable youths in Minnesota. All 5 kids are Black. After the adoption, the family moved to a farm in Washington State in 2018. Then they relocated to West Virginia in 2023. Again, a rural farm where the couple kept the children isolated. Adopting the 5 kids seems to have become the couple's almost occupation. While they were in Minnesota, the couple allegedly received $318,000 in child assistance, and the same type of money was doled out in Washington and West Virginia. Well, back in October of 2023, neighbors of the family witnessed something they just couldn't look past. They saw Dawn lock the oldest adopted child and then her next younger brother in a shed located on the West Virginia property. And then they left the property, left the kids locked up. The Kanawha County Sheriff's deputies showed up to the property and found the 2 children in the shed. The Sheriff's Department said the shed had no running water, no bathroom, and no exit other than the locked door. The deputies described the brother and sister as siblings who had been deprived of adequate hygienic care and food, saying they had overwhelming body odor. The boy had open sores on his dirty and bare feet. The 14-year-old and 16-year-old told the deputies that they had been in the shed for about 12 hours and that other times they were locked in the shed overnight without anywhere to sleep but a concrete floor. Deputies then forced their way into the family home where they found a 9-year-old child crying and alone. When the neighbors were interviewed, they told deputies that they had seen the children working on the farm for long hours and that on some occasions, it seemed like the children weren't being allowed inside the family home. Well, Don arrived home hours after the deputies were called to the property. He had the 11-year-old with him. That left 1 child unaccounted for, and Don said the 6-year-old could be found at a friend's house. When Don was asked by deputies about his adopted son and daughter being locked inside the shed, his attorney said that there was a key inside the shed where the teens were found and that it was, quote, just a plain and simple misunderstanding. Well, that day, all of the kids were returned to foster care, and a more thorough investigation began. During that investigation, authorities learned that the couple ran from Washington following abuse allegations in that state, and that's how they ended up in the rural property in West Virginia. But it wasn't the initial charges that kept Jeannie and Don behind bars. See, the 2 allegedly sold their home and made bond. That's when investigators and the state came back with charges of human trafficking in June of 2024. That's a much stiffer charge. And when Jeannie and Don were jailed again that June, the judge raised their bonds to $500,000 each. Well, last week, the horrific details of the children's treatment were exposed during the trial for Don and Jeannie. See, the couple had cameras in their home, and that video footage was extensive. Prosecutors said the children were forced to stand for hours at a time, often during the night, so that they wouldn't even be allowed to go to sleep. And while standing, at times, if they didn't keep their hands above their heads, they would be hit. One video showed a male child being struck with a lead pipe for not keeping his hands above his head. Footage also showed that the children were at times only allowed to use a portable toilet to relieve themselves. Prosecutors also said the children were surviving on a diet of peanut butter sandwiches and that they would go weeks without being allowed to shower or bathe or even brush their teeth. Video footage showed that when Jeannie felt like the children had disobeyed in some way, she would spray them with bear spray. That's going to have kind of the same reaction for children like they had been sprayed with mace or pepper spray. Now, during the trial, a forensic technology expert shared text messages that had been retrieved from both Dawn and Jeannie's phones. Some of the disturbing texts were about the couple's 14-year-old boy, the one that they had locked in the shed. Now, that boy is reported to have been suffering from severe mental illness, and the defense team says the couple was just struggling with his aggressive behavior, especially since that child went through puberty. Well, in those text messages, the couple refer to this challenging teen as PB, which apparently in their shortened language stood for P-boy or P-brain and psycho boy. Now, the defense attorney downplayed the texts and said that the couple had specifically moved to the house in West Virginia to be closer to a mental hospital. That's so that the teen boy could receive professional help. The defense attorneys for Jeannie and Dawn claimed that the allegations of forced labor were just being misconstrued. He told the AP that Dawn and Jeannie and their kids are just farm people that do farm chores. He said it, quote, wasn't about race and that it wasn't about forced labor. Well, after 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found Jeannie guilty on all counts of civil rights violations, child abuse, forced child neglect, forced labor, and human trafficking. But it seems the jury saw Dawn just a little bit differently. They found him not guilty of 4 of his counts of civil rights violations, but he was found guilty on all other charges, which also included human trafficking, forced labor, gross child neglect, and child abuse. Now, those civil rights violations are the charges specifically related to race. Dawn's attorney said he felt like Dawn had, kind of communicated through his verbal and nonverbal cues to the jury that he had a good relationship with the kids and race never came into his mind when he made a parenting decision. And remember how I said the human trafficking and civil rights violations were the big ones here? Well, the prosecutor told WCHS that these charges against Dawn and Jeannie were the first time in West Virginia they have been successfully argued and completed. He said that those kind of cases have a higher requirement of proof and that they wouldn't have been able to receive the convictions if the entire team of investigators and detectives and those in the DA office hadn't worked so tirelessly to get the convictions. Now, when the verdicts were read, the couple, according to WCHS, did not show much emotion. Jeannie can face up to 215 years in prison, and Dawn can face up to 140 years in prison for their inhumane treatment of the children. They will be sentenced in March. Now to Okaloosa County, Florida, where a botched surgery potentially led to the death of a 70-year-old man. And when I say botched, this one's huge. It's not like the surgeon left a 2-inch by 2-inch gauze pad inside somebody's body. In this case, the surgeon is being accused of removing the wrong organ. Beverly and William Bryan are a retired couple from Alabama, but the two were visiting a family property in Florida when William had a sudden onset of pain in his left side. Well, the couple immediately went to the Ascension Sacred Heart Imperial Coast Hospital, and Bryan was admitted for testing to try to determine what was causing the pain. Medical staff discovered that Bryan's spleen needed to be removed, and it needed to happen ASAP. Bryan agreed to surgery, and an emergency laparoscopic splenectomy was what Bryan signed up for. It's allegedly not what he got. First off, The doctor was late. Remember, this is an emergency case, and he's over an hour late. Then the doctor changed the surgery from laparoscopic to open, meaning a much larger cut to the body and a more invasive surgery. During the surgery, an organ was removed and extensive blood loss followed. An emergency blood transfusion was started, but Brian suffered cardiac arrest and died. According to court documents, throughout the emergency surgery, Dr. Thomas Shignovsky, the attending surgeon, repeatedly told the medical staff that he had removed the spleen and that the blood loss was because William was suffering from an aneurysm. Well, the filed documents state that the medical staff, quote, looked at him like he was crazy. Yet, Dr. Shignovsky continued to state he had performed the surgery correctly and that William just died from an aneurysm. Well, following the surgery, a pathology report on the removed organ proved that it was not a spleen. It was a liver. Dr. Shignovsky removed William's liver, believing it was his spleen. Now, according to reporting, a spleen and a liver look totally different. Apparently, they're different in color and size, and they are located in different parts of the body. The court documents also claim that the wrong site surgery wasn't Dr. Shignovsky's first mistake in a surgery suite. The documents allege that just a year earlier, the surgeon had caused another patient's death when he accidentally perforated the patient's bowel during a gallbladder removal. Well, following that incident, Dr. Shignovsky took a leave of absence, but then returned to performing surgeries. The documents also claim that during the first 5 months of Dr. Shignovsky's performing surgeries at the Ascension Hospital, well, his patients were experiencing so many adverse surgical side effects that multiple complaints had been filed with the Florida Department of Health. These claims also included a weird, quote, response by Dr. Shignovsky. Apparently, when his patients would complain about the surgery or lack of pain relief following surgery, Dr. Shignovsky would get all religious on them and talk about faith-based concepts and explain that that's why the ill effects were happening. Well, as you've guessed, Beverly, that's William's wife, she has filed a lawsuit against the surgeon and the hospital. She claims the hospital should have known that they had a consistently negligent and dangerous surgeon on staff who needed to be permanently stripped of his surgical privileges in order to protect the community. The suit also claims that Dr. Shignovsky botched a hernia operation just before William's alleged botched surgery. He's also been accused of removing a portion of a patient's pancreas when he should have been removing a bad adrenal gland. Okay, obviously, I don't know the difference of how an adrenal gland and a pancreas look, but the report filed by the state says that an adrenal gland is small and triangular, and a pancreas is much larger and located behind the stomach and not near the kidney. Well, late last year, Dr. Shignovsky's medical license was suspended. So for now, he isn't operating on anyone. The suit is asking for a minimum of $50,000 in damages. What would you reward if all that the suit alleges turns out to be true? Would you award $2 million or $3 million, or would you only award $50,000? Let me know what you think. And now this story, where a newly minted multimillionaire has now been found guilty of murdering a man over $1,200. All right, we're in Philadelphia, and it's 1990. On the night of November 12th, at about 11:30, police arrested Sharn Thomas for attempting to steal a motorcycle. Sharn is young back in 1990, about 16 years old, and he's really just running the streets. His mother, probably nearing the end of her rope, came to the police station the next morning on the 13th and signed the release forms for her son. Sharn and his mom then went directly to the Youth Study Center in downtown Philly and completed an intake interview at 9 a.m. Now, this mom is just trying to get her son on the right track. After the interview, Sharn signed a subpoena, and he was completely released from law enforcement custody and back into the custody of his mother. Well, following all of that, Sharn's sister took Sharn home in the mid-afternoon hours. All right, We allegedly know where Sharn was on November 13th, at least until about 3 p.m. Well, that same morning, Domingo Martinez picked up $25,000 in cash from a Mellon Bank branch in Philadelphia. At 9:55 a.m., numerous witnesses say a car rammed into Domingo's car on the driver's side. When the collision brought the two cars to a halt, witnesses said 3 men exited the car that hit Domingo. One of the men raised a gun and shot Domingo through the car's front windshield. Domingo was pulled from the car, and the shooter drove Domingo's car from the scene. The other 2 guys? Well, witnesses say they climbed into the car that hit Domingo, and they fled the scene as well. Now, police were left searching for clues and for the 3 men who killed Domingo for at least a couple of months. But then, early in 1991, homicide investigators received a tip that Domingo was killed by a gang of young boys called the G-Boys. When investigators followed up on the lead, they seized a blue Chevy belonging to one of the boys. They believed that that was the car used to ram Domingo's car, even though there were 4 witnesses who said the car was red and white, not blue. Then, a year later, a man named Nathaniel, who was currently in jail on criminal charges, well, he said he knew that 6 men had committed Domingo's murder, not 3. All right, that was different. Then, 7 months later, Nathaniel's cousin, John, well, he got arrested. So we've got Nathaniel in trouble with the law, and now we have John, his cousin, in trouble with the law. Well, John suddenly had info on Domingo's murder as well. But here's the weird part. The 6 guys that John said committed the murder are not the same 6 guys his cousin Nathaniel said committed the murder. Also, John said he was one of the 6, so he's implicating himself in this story. But the story has more problems than that. One of the 5 other guys, besides himself, that John named, well, one of those guys absolutely couldn't have been there because he was in prison on that November morning in 1990. And John is now saying there are 2 cars instead of 1 that rammed and cut off Domingo's car. Okay, remember, there's 4 witnesses in this case, and none of those witnesses could identify John as being at the scene, yet John has concocted quite the story that includes a different color car than the 4 witnesses say was at the scene. Well, 2.5 years after Domingo's death, Sharn was charged with Domingo's murder, even though he had signed a subpoena showing he was working through being released from jail on the morning of Domingo's death. Prosecutors said the signature on the document wasn't Sharn's. And at trial, Sharn's mother, Sharn's sister, and the juvenile court employee did not testify, even though they were allegedly with Sharn that morning. And the 4 witnesses from the scene of the murder, well, they didn't testify either. Sharn was found guilty just 4 years after the murder of Domingo, and he spent the next 24 years in prison until the Innocence Project took up his case. And while they were doing their work, the Philadelphia District Attorney's Conviction Review Unit began working on the case as well. And thank goodness for these people, because they discovered 36 pages of undisclosed witness statements pointing at other suspects, not implicating Sharn. Well, within days of the discovery, Sharn's conviction was vacated. All charges were dropped, and his record was expunged. Now, they could have refiled charges and taken Sharn back to trial, but they chose not to, even though the prosecutors at the time stated that they, quote, were not completely convinced he was innocent. Well, pretty quickly after his release in 2017, Sharn filed suit against the city of Philadelphia, and 3 years later, he was awarded $4.1 million for his time spent behind bars for his wrongful conviction. Now, this is the part of the story where you would hope that Sharn could have rebuilt his life, moved on past the deceptive practices that were employed against him back in the early 90s. And we thought that's what was going to happen, because back in 2017, he even told NBC News that he had no animosity towards the police and that he just wanted to move forward. But Sharn's life took a different trajectory. 2 years ago, January 3rd of 2023, 38-year-old Akeem Edwards was shot in the chest on a Philadelphia street. He died en route to the hospital. And Akeem and Sharn, well, they're connected. See, through his Innocence Project work, Sharn had met Ketra Vesey. She's the sister to a man named Willie, who had his murder charge overturned as well. So that's how those two got connected. And that murder charge, well, it's another story, a different episode. I'll look into it. We'll see if there's something there. But Ketra and Sharn, they began dating, and they did so on and off for about 6 years after they met. And during that time, Sharn asked Ketra to introduce him to her cousin, Akeem. Sharn wanted Akeem to run drugs for him. It's really that simple. After Akeem and Sharn connected, Sharn gave Akeem a sandwich bag filled with cocaine and told him to go sell the drugs and then return $1,200 to him. Akeem could keep any profit above the $1,200. Akeem didn't make good on the deal, at least according to prosecutors. And Sharn was frustrated. He was out of the drugs and out of the money, so he was left empty-handed. Well, on that January 3rd morning 2 years ago, Sharn and Ketra went to run some errands. After they were done, he told Ketra he wanted to drive by Akeem's house before they went home. As they neared Akeem's home, they spotted him on the street. Sharn got out of the car and confronted Akeem. Following some words, Sharn shot Akeem and ran back to the car where Ketra was waiting. Ketra said Sharn screamed the following, "He's hit, he's down, just drive." She then said once Sharn caught his breath, he told her that Akeem would be his third homicide and he can't go back to prison. She then said Sharn threatened her and told her to keep her mouth quiet and that he knows where her children live. Well, it wasn't Ketra that ran her mouth and got Sharn arrested for Akeem's murder. It was actually Sharn who ran his own mouth. He told the story to an informant, and that information allowed police to secure a search warrant for Sharn's house, where they found 5 weapons and a Gap hoodie that matched the hoodie that witnesses from Akeem's shooting had described. After Sharn was jailed, he sent threatening letters to Ketra. Those letters led Ketra to finally agree to work with the investigators, and that ultimately led to her testimony, and then that ultimately led to this multimillionaire Sharn pleading guilty to the murder of Akeem. His actual charges that he pled guilty to are third-degree murder, conspiracy, and illegal gun possession. Sharn will be sentenced next month, and he could spend the rest of his life in prison. When Judge Roxanne Covington reviewed the case, she looked visibly stunned in the courtroom, at least according to Law and Crime. She raised her head and asked Sharn if the facts of the case were true. He answered with, "Yes, Your Honor." I just want to go back to something Ketra said. She claims that Sharn said it was his third homicide. Who are the others that he allegedly killed? It seems pretty clear by the evidence shown through the Innocence Project that Sharn couldn't have committed the murder of Domingo. So if he isn't one of the 3 that were killed, who are the other 2? And if Domingo is one of the 3, how? How does that murder conflict with what the Innocence Project is reporting, even on their own website? I feel like we have so many unanswered questions here. Akeem's family did tell the court they hope Sharn spends the rest of his life behind bars. Let me know what you think of this case and if you're as baffled as I am. And finally, you guys, I've been doing Rise in Crime for almost 2 years, and all the time, a new case will pop up and I'll think, I've yet to cover something like this. And you guys, it happened again today. First, I need to tell you a little background here. We didn't refer to passing gas in our house while the kids were growing up as farting. I would say fluff instead of fart, just trying to teach the kids to not be so, crass. My grandson says the word toot instead of fart. In fact, I call him a 5-star tutor all the time. It's this little joke we have with each other. And it was just something about the word fart that it seemed somewhat abrasive. Well, in Great Britain, fart is more than abrasive because a landmark case has now made cyber farting a crime. Here's how it all erupted. 25-year-old Rhiannon Evans did not like her boyfriend's previous love interest, Deborah. She disliked her so much that she sent numerous videos of her farting to simply stalk and annoy Deborah. On December 22nd, Rhiannon took 3 different videos of her passing gas and she sent them to Deborah. Then, over the next 3 days, Rhiannon sent 4 more tooting videos. I guess maybe they were Merry Christmas wishes? Who knows? And Deborah, well, she said she felt distress and anxiety over receiving those videos, and so she filed a complaint against Rhiannon. When police got wind of the crime, they arrested Rhiannon, and that led to her facing up to her smelly crime in a courtroom last week. Prosecutor Diane Williams, with a completely straight face, told the court that Rhiannon would smile at the camera, then place the camera on her bottom and proceed to pass gas. Now, Rhiannon got to explain her actions, and her attorney said that Rhiannon's boyfriend and Deborah, his ex, well, that they have kind of a tumultuous relationship that involves the child that the two share. Her attorney claimed that Rhiannon felt a need to defend her boyfriend, and at the time of the videoing of the farting, Rhiannon had consumed a lot of alcohol. Her attorney said she had no ill intent with the videos, and she did not intend to cause distress to Deborah. Well, Rhiannon's ability to command air to leave her body has clouded over her with a guilty verdict. She now owes roughly $800 in US dollars in damages to different people, some to Deborah, some to the court. And that's not all. Rhiannon must attend 15 rehabilitation sessions for her tooting, and she must abstain from alcohol for 2 months. She also can't have any contact with Deborah for 2 years. Cyber farting. Who knew it was a crime? And now just a couple of quick comments from Thursday's episode. Caitlin reminded me that Whataburger has pretty great biscuits and gravy. Now, I've never eaten at Whataburger. My son lived in Oklahoma for 2 years, and he says the food is pretty good. So I'll take his word and Caitlin's word on that. And Milk with Anime thinks we pronounce Whataburger different. Now, I know I place an R in there. I'm not sure why I do that. So tell me, listeners from the South, how do you say it? Is it Whataburger or Whataburger? What a burger. I don't know. Tell me how you guys say it. Now, another commenter, Emily, she wants me to cover the DC plane crash. I will when more information is released. I'll say this for now. Tons of love and grace to the families who lost their loved ones. And to the Army Black Hawk pilots, grace also. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't figure out what went wrong. And there is a gracefully way to do so. We can't blanket statements say that the pilots weren't trained enough or that they might have been negligent. If the evidence shows that, then I'll report it here. There is something we can agree on. A couple of things. Show love to those hurt and support the best of the best working as our physicians and our air traffic controllers and our military personnel and any other people who are directly connected to our safety. Well, that's your Monday episode of Rise in Crime. Thank you for being here and being part of this shared podcast. I want to talk about the cases that you're interested in, so please let me know what your case suggestions are. I'm really grateful for the additional 5-star reviews and the positive comments. Thank you for leaving those. And you can like and follow us on all of our social media accounts here at Ono Media. We've got the 3 podcasts. That's Murder with My Husband, Into the Dark, and of course, Rise in Crime. You can join me again on Thursday for more morning crime news. I'm Mama Jules, and keep safe out there.